On the morning of December 3rd, 1942, a reconnaissance flight out of Henderson Field brought back some unsettling photos. At first glance, it was just another image of swaying palm trees. But for the Allied analysts, there was something here that didn't add up. The shadows. They didn't match the trees. The angles betrayed something unnatural. Straining their eyes over magnifying glasses, they finally saw it. Beneath the careful lattice of cables, fronds, and camouflage netting was a hidden human-made structure, nearly 6,000 feet long, and 90% complete. If this was what they thought it was, the lives of the 58,000 American troops fighting in Guadalcanal were about to be torn apart from above. The hidden airfield. The Japanese construction battalions that landed on Munda Point in late November 1942 were some of the most specialized engineering crews on Earth. Working only in darkness, they transformed a coconut plantation into an airbase, while American reconnaissance planes circled overhead, blind to the transformation below. Their method was ingenious. Each night, crews would select a section of the grove. They'd climb the palms, secure steel cables between the crowns, then cut the trunks at the base. The trees hung suspended on their wire web, while bulldozers scraped coral beneath. By dawn, they'd lower the canopy back into place, creating a perfect illusion of an undisturbed plantation. Native laborers scattered fresh fronds over disturbed earth. From 10,000 feet, it looked like virgin jungle. For a week, American pilots flew over Munda, seeing only jungle. Their liberators and flying fortresses photographed every square mile of coastline, but the Japanese Phantom airfield remained invisible. When the report that there might be a hidden airfield came on December 3rd, American William F. Bull Halsey felt the implications immediately. Enemy fighters operating from Munda could provide cover for the Tokyo Express runs. Worse, they could escort bombers all the way to Henderson Field and back. The 58,000 American troops on Guadalcanal would be under constant air attack. The regenerating target. The first American raids came on December 4th, hours after discovery. 9 B-17s from the 11th Bombardment Group rolled down Henderson Field runway at 6 a.m., each carrying 500-pound general-purpose bombs. They found Munda easily enough. The fresh coral practically glowed against the dark jungle. At 20,000 feet, Bombardier Lieutenant James McCoy centered the runway in his northern bomb site, then, quote, bombs away. 36 500-pounders tumbled through the clear morning air. The impacts walked across the airstrip in textbook fashion, throwing coral and steel matting skyward. McCoy reported, quote, direct hits along the entire runway. Target destroyed. Except it wasn't. The next morning's reconnaissance showed fresh steel matting where craters should have been. The runway looked operational. Revetments that had burned were rebuilt. New camouflage netting was draped over aircraft shelters. December 9th brought heavier raids. B-17s from Espiritu Santo joined the assault. Marine SBD Dauntlesses dove through scattered flak to drop their loads. Navy TBF Avengers launched from Henderson came in low, their torpedoes replaced with 2,000-pound blockbusters designed to crater runways beyond repair. Pilots reported the entire field torn to pieces. Intelligence counted over 40 direct hits on the runway alone. Supply dumps burned for hours. A lucky hit on a camouflaged ammunition point sent a column of fire 500 feet skyward. But another reconnaissance flight brought more bad news. Runway operational. 2 zeros visible in revetments. By mid-December, the raids had become routine. Day after day, American squadrons pulverized Munda. Night after night, Japanese work crews, supplemented now by hundreds of Korean laborers, filled the craters. They pre-positioned coral fill. They stockpiled steel matting in hidden dumps throughout the jungle. They could repair a cratered runway section in 4 hours. The Christmas Eve raid should have ended it. 20 zeros caught taking off. Half were shot down by wildcats, the rest strafed in their revetments. Every visible structure burned. Yet on Christmas morning, 6 zeros launched from Munda to strafe American positions on Guadalcanal. By New Year's Eve, intelligence reported medium bombers operating from the field. In 1 month, American aircraft had dropped between 150 and 200 tons of ordnance on a single airstrip. The Japanese hadn't just survived the onslaught, they had expanded operations. Munda seemed indestructible. into enemy waters. On December 30th, 1942, the morning briefing indicated that Munda had absorbed another 40 tons of bombs the previous day. Japanese fighters were operating normally. The bombs weren't working. Halsey needed another solution, and he knew exactly what could get the job done: naval gunfire. A surface bombardment force would slip north under cover of darkness, pound Munda with hundreds of shells during a 1-hour window, and then escape at full speed before the Japanese warplanes reached their position. It meant penetrating 200 miles into Japanese waters, where no American surface force had ventured since the war began. Comsopac's dispatch created the task organization. Rear Admiral Walden L. Ainsworth would lead Task Force Affirm with 3 light cruisers, Nashville, St. Louis, and Helena, plus destroyers Fletcher and O'Bannon. 3 battleships and 4 destroyers under Rear Admiral Willis A. Lee would provide distant cover. The timing was critical. The bombardment would coincide with a major troop movement to Guadalcanal on January 4th, serving as both a diversion and protective screen. Aboard Nashville, Ainsworth studied the charts with his staff. The approach to Munda was a navigator's nightmare: coral reefs, narrow passages, confined waters. His written assessment wasn't optimistic, identifying 2 major hurdles. Quote, "First, how to get in there undetected, or at least deny the enemy any knowledge of our intended move in his direction. Second, how to retire beyond reach of his land-based air by daylight the following morning and make use of the air coverage provided for us." On January 2nd, in a conference aboard Louisville, Ainsworth's plan took shape. Each cruiser would fire for 10 minutes along a 3-mile track at 18 knots. Total ammunition, nearly 1,100 6-inch rounds per ship. The destroyers would add 10 rounds per gun per minute with their 5-inchers. Navigation in the darkness would depend on radar and one crucial aid: the submarine Grayback, under Lieutenant Commander Edward Stephen, would surface precisely 2 miles northwest of Bunyetta Point, serving as a moving lighthouse. The submarine was already en route, though barely recovered from an extraordinary medical crisis. Days earlier, a seaman's appendix had ruptured while submerged. According to the action report, the pharmacist mate had operated on the wardroom table using spoons from the galley and pliers from the engine room in lieu of surgical equipment. For spotting, Lieutenant Commander Dennis Crowley had arranged radar-equipped PBY Black Cats to orbit over Munda. Unlike the cruiser's float planes, these could loiter for hours, calling corrections. Crowley himself would fly the preliminary missions on January 2nd and 3rd, harassing Munda while memorizing landmarks. The conference concluded with the captain studying recognition silhouettes and approach routes. No radio transmission toward the beach. No blinker signals that might alert coast watchers. Complete darkness, complete surprise. Crowley's after-action report captured the stakes. Quote, "The night bombardment of Munda is the first naval action against shore installations in which the most modern instruments, including our latest developments in radar, are available for navigation and fire control purposes. It's also the first action in which our Navy has coordinated surface, submarine, and aircraft units in a night bombardment." 5 warships were going up against an enemy base that had survived 200 tons of bombs. Phantoms in the night. January 4th, 8 p.m. Southwest of the Russell Islands, Task Force Affirm split from the covering force and turned northwest into enemy waters. 5 ships in the column, Nashville leading, then St. Louis and Helena, with destroyers Fletcher and O'Bannon screening. They were dashing at a speed of 26 knots and headed for Munda Point, 200 miles into Japanese territory. The night was absolutely black. Overcast skies blocked starlight. Passing rain squalls reduced visibility to nearly zero. Perfect conditions for an undetected approach or for crashing into a coral reef. In Nashville's pilot house, Captain Spanigal watched the SG radar scope. Each sweep painted ghostly green outlines of islands and reefs. The new radar was their lifeline. Without it, this mission would never have been possible. Echo-ranging gear pinged constantly, searching for underwater obstacles. The navigator plotted fixes every few minutes, matching radar returns to chart positions. At 11 p.m., each cruiser sent a float plane up. Launching required brief illumination of each ship. In these waters, even seconds of light could bring disaster. but these SOC Seagulls were carrying flares for emergency illumination in case something went wrong. The planes would orbit behind Rendova Island, ready to warn of enemy surface forces. 30 minutes later, the Black Cats were already over Munda, harassing the airfield with 500-pound bombs. Their engines masked the approaching ships. Below, Japanese searchlights stabbed upward, hunting the invisible warplanes, not expecting approaching ships. By 12:25 a.m., Nashville's radar found the grayback, surfaced exactly where it promised, 2 miles northwest of Bunyetta Point. The submarine blinked her challenge signal. Nashville responded. The navigation checkpoint was perfect. The column slowed to 18 knots for the final approach. As they rounded Bunyetta Point, tension mounted. The Japanese Tokyo Express ran these waters nightly. One chance encounter would doom the mission. Then it happened. Fletcher's lookouts reported it. A large ship straight ahead, 4,000 to 5,000 yards. Multiple officers and men verified the sighting. It was a massive vessel directly in their path. But the SG radar, trained on the bearing, showed nothing. The radar operator stared at his empty scope. According to the action report, he was seen shaking his fist at the screen and shouting. Fletcher turned hard to port, and the torpedo tubes were training out. The Phantom ship seemed to move with them, drawing left while maintaining the same target angle. Impossible behavior for any real vessel. Fletcher's commander ordered torpedoes held. At 1:02 a.m., Nashville opened fire. 15 6-inch guns shattered the night. Muzzle flashes lit the sea for miles. And suddenly, Fletcher's Phantom disappeared. The blunder became painfully clear. They'd been tracking their own shadow, projected on the light haze by Nashville's gunfire. When Nashville ceased firing at 1:13 a.m. and St. Louis took up the bombardment, the Phantom reappeared. Nashville experienced the same phenomenon. Her action report noted firing, quote, with her 5-inch and automatic weapons at a Phantom torpedo boat on the starboard bow. Later, intelligence revealed the Japanese had suffered identical confusion during their October bombardment of Guadalcanal. Captured documents included reports of Japanese destroyers chasing American vessels that weren't there. But in the darkness off Munda, with guns blazing and adrenaline surging, the Phantom seemed terrifyingly real. The gun flashes that created them also announced Task Force Affirm's position to every Japanese observer within 20 miles. They had thrown away the element of surprise, chasing their own shadows. Fire and steel. Nashville steadied on the firing course, speed 18 knots, range to target closing fast. The Japanese knew they were here now. Her 15 guns erupted in unison. 130-pound shells screamed through the darkness at 2,600 feet per second. Tracers carved brilliant arcs across the black sky. The first salvo landed 13,400 yards away, 8 miles of trajectory, ending in fountains of coral and flame. The Black Cat spotter radioed from 8,000 feet above Munda, quote, up 500, no change in deflection. Nashville's gun crews cranked elevation. Second salvo. The shells walked up the beach and found the runway, quote, no change. Now the real shooting began. Captain Spanigal ordered rapid, continuous fire. Nashville's turrets thundered in sequence, forward, aft, forward again. Every 7 seconds, 15 shells slammed into Munda. The destroyer captains watching from astern reported an incredible sight. 6 separate salvos hanging in the air simultaneously, each a cluster of orange tracers arcing through space. An observer would later write, quote, the stream of tracers looked as though she were playing a fiery hose on the enemy position. Nashville's fire control teams worked like machines. Plot generated new coordinates. Turrets swung fractionally left and right. From the Black Cat, quote, you're rocking them away, right up the beach. No shots going in water. The shell pattern walked methodically across the airfield, runway, dispersal areas, and fuel dumps. Small fires erupted south of the runway, then larger ones. The Japanese tried to respond. Dull red tracers rose from gun positions near the airfield, arcing toward the cruiser. Captain Campbell aboard St. Louis noted, quote, this return fire was detected by seeing the tracers rise from the vicinity of the airfield. It's concluded, from the path that enemy trajectories took, that all their fire fell considerably short. At 1:13 p.m., Nashville ceased fire, her gun barrels glowing. 853 rounds downrange in 11 minutes. She accelerated to 25 knots, clearing the firing line. St. Louis swung into position. Her first salvos overshot, landing beyond the runway. The cruiser adjusted. Suddenly, the shoreline erupted. Whether from St. Louis's shells or Nashville's delayed fuse rounds, massive fires bloomed across the target area. A fuel storage complex had ignited. The fires spread, leaping from building to building. St. Louis poured shells into the conflagration, and 65% of her rounds landed in the target area, according to aerial observers. More Japanese batteries opened up, their tracers creating a bizarre light show. American orange racing east, Japanese red crawling west, all of it reflected in the burning fuel tanks. 10 minutes later, Helena took the stage. Her first salvo fell short. The second found the target. Then the spotter's voice crackled with excitement, quote, "Beautiful, excellent, excellent." Helena's gun crews had found their rhythm. Each impact was marked by a sharp flash. A tremendous explosion lit the night, the flash visible from 20 miles away. The Black Cat later reported, quote, "This ship covered Munda Point thoroughly, causing a large explosion on the hill to the north of the runway." At 1:40 p.m., it was the destroyer's turn. Fletcher and O'Bannon charged the firing line together, their 5-inch guns barking in rapid sequence. With smaller shells, but a devastating rate of fire, the destroyers walked their patterns along the beach, into revetments, and across auxiliary targets. Small fires merged into larger ones. After 10 more minutes, the order to cease fire came over the radios. 48 minutes. 4,000 shells. Munda burned behind them as Task Force Affirm fled south into the darkness, presumably beyond the reach of a Japanese counterattack. But they had underestimated their enemy. The morning ambush. By 7 a.m., Task Force Affirm was 30 miles south of the Russell Islands, seemingly safe. 4 Wildcat fighters from Henderson Field arrived overhead. The ship slowed to 28 knots, and crews began to relax after the night's tension. 2 hours later, the bombardment group made rendezvous with the rest of Task Force 67, cruisers Honolulu, Louisville, Columbia, and the New Zealand light cruiser Achilles, plus 3 destroyers. The combined force needed to recover float planes and slowed to 15 knots. Some ships remained at Condition 1, full readiness. Others had relaxed to Condition 3. On Honolulu, battery drills were underway, and her own planes were making practice dives. The morning was routine. Suddenly, 6 Aichi-99 dive bombers appeared, approaching from Henderson Field at 12,000 feet. The sun bore 112 degrees true at 47 degrees altitude, perfect backlighting for an attack. Radar had tracked them for minutes, but everyone assumed they were American. After all, they came from Guadalcanal. They looked like wildcats in the glare. A PBY passed through the formation just before the attack, reinforcing the illusion of friendly air activity. The Japanese pilots knew exactly what they were doing. The lead bombers screamed into 75-degree dives before anyone reacted. Honolulu was turning to port when the first bombs were released. 3 near misses straddled her, 1 25 yards to port, 2 to starboard. Water towers erupted around the cruiser. Her anti-aircraft guns managed 1 ineffective round each from mounts 2 and 8 before the attackers were overhead. Behind Honolulu, the Achilles had no chance. Her crew had watched the approaching planes and identified them as wildcats in diamond formation. Only when they peeled off into attack dives did the truth register. 3 of her 20mm guns were manned. That was all. The third bomber in the formation dove through scattered fire and released. The 250-pound bomb struck squarely on Achilles' No. 3 turret roof. The blast was catastrophic. According to the action report, quote, "The right side of the turret, made of 1-inch plate, was blown into the sea. The roof, also of 1-inch plate, was split into its component halves. One half was thrown under the quarterdeck, the other half tossed vertically into the air, where it turned upside down and landed on the turret again. 9 men were lost instantly. The 20mm gun mounted atop the turret ended up on the quarterdeck, still attached to half the roof by a single bolt. Columbia and Louisville opened fire as the plane swept over. Louisville's gunners caught 1 Aichi at 800 yards, shells ripping into its fuselage. The bomber lost altitude and crashed. Another came in low from astern, trying to strafe. More 20mm fire drove it off. The remaining bombers swung towards St. Louis and Helena, 4,000 yards away. Both cruisers threw up massive anti-aircraft barrages. An Aichi released wildly and crashed near St. Louis. Another fell to Helena's guns. O'Bannon reported 5 planes burning in the water. 6 minutes after it began, the attack was over. Achilles' turret still burned, but damage control teams quickly doused the flames. She maintained her position in the column, never losing way. The Burning Plantations. Task Force Affirm reached Espiritu Santo on January 8th, flush with apparent victory. The crews had seen Munda burning and heard the spotters' enthusiastic reports. Admiral Ainsworth wrote confidently, quote, "Reports from our spot in Catalina over Munda indicate that the bombardment was successful." Then, the reconnaissance photos arrived. 18 hours after the bombardment, Japanese fighters were operating from Munda. The runway showed fresh patches where craters had been filled. Dispersal areas were repaired. Anti-aircraft positions were manned. The 4,000 shells, the Phantom ships, the terrifying run through enemy waters had brought less than a day's disruption. Worse, the enemy was expanding. By mid-January, Japanese construction crews had nearly completed a second airfield at Villa Stanmore on Kolombangara Island, just across Kula Gulf from Munda. 2 mutually supported bases, double the threat to Guadalcanal. The bombs kept falling, and the repairs kept coming. Between Munda's discovery and mid-January, American aircraft flew over 90 missions against it. Nothing worked. The Japanese had stockpiled coral fill, steel matting, and construction equipment throughout the jungle. They could still repair a cratered runway in 4 hours. SINCPAC's assessment was blunt. Ship bombardment caused transient damage to airfields. But Halsey had no choice. Every night, Japanese barges ran between the islands. In December, coast watchers counted 28 barges in Diamond Narrows in one convoy. The Villa garrison had grown from 400 to 4,000 troops. January 19th brought new orders. Hit Villa Stanmore, disrupt the supply runs, take down the troops while still in their bivouacs. Buy time. Admiral Ainsworth assembled a leaner force. Ammunition shortages limited him to 2 cruisers, Nashville and Helena, plus destroyers Nicholas, De Haven, Radford, and O'Bannon. The confined waters of Kula Gulf would make this even more dangerous than Munda. Ships would have to fire while heading into a trap. Surprise attack. The mission went wrong from the start. Japanese reconnaissance found Task Force Affirm southwest of Guadalcanal. For 7 hours, enemy snoopers shadowed them, staying just out of reach of American fighters. The element of surprise was gone. At 8 p.m., the bombardment group turned north into darkness and rain. Past midnight, 3 aircraft appeared with full navigation lights, white wingtips, and tails. Mitsubishi bombers, circling O'Bannon, flashing U in Morse code. For over an hour, they orbited, apparently uncertain if they'd found friend or foe. They held a perfect attack position, but never dropped. Nashville turned on to the bombardment course. Japanese searchlights immediately stabbed upward from Villa, hunting the Black Cat spotters. Then Nashville opened fire. Helena followed. Their shells hit with 95% accuracy. Then De Haven joined in, and the night erupted. Commander Charles Tolman watched massive flames tower above the palms. He later wrote, quote, "We naturally assumed that we'd hit the jackpot with the first nickel, but have since been informed that the fires were actually started by the cruisers." The conflagration spread to 300 yards square. Ammunition cooked off in the heat. Fuel drums detonated. For 20 minutes, Villa Stanmore burned like a torch. Fury at Kula Gulf. 2 months had passed since the Burning Plantations. 2 months of repairs, reinforcements, and growing Japanese strength. By March 1943, Admiral Merrill was leading a new strike force north. 3 cruisers for Villa Stanmore and 4 destroyers for Munda. This time, both bases would burn simultaneously. The approach on March 5th was flawless. Clear skies, calm seas, no enemy contact. Merrill's cruisers, Montpelier, Cleveland, and Denver, slipped into Kula Gulf just after midnight, destroyers screening ahead. The Japanese seemed unaware. It was perfect. Then Montpelier's radar operator spoke quietly, quote, "Contact. Bearing 234. Range 14300. The pip was exactly where Sesamboki Island should be, but 9,000 yards short. He studied the return for 1 minute, then made the call. Enemy vessel. The pip separated. 2 ships, northbound, opposite course from the Americans. Every radar in the task force locked on. Gun directors swung silently in the darkness. The range was closing fast. Montpelier fired first, her shells reaching out into the darkness. Cleveland and Denver followed immediately, with all 3 cruisers concentrating on the second ship, which painted better on their scopes. The 6th salvo struck home. Fire erupted from the enemy's aft turret, and then an explosion amidship sent flames mushrooming 150 feet skyward. In that instant flash of light, Cleveland spotters identified her, a large destroyer, white band on the rigged stack. Down in Kula Gulf's confined waters, the destroyer Waller had been tracking the same target. Commander Frost had estimated the enemy's speed at 24 knots. As the cruiser's shells found their mark, he fired 5 torpedoes, fanning out across the water. The burning destroyer, slowed by shell hits, turned directly into their path. The torpedo struck amidships, with what Admiral Merrill later described as a, quote, "colossal explosion without noise. A flash so bright it was seen by the Munda force 25 miles away, yet strangely muffled by distance and wind. The enemy destroyer broke in half and vanished, leaving only burning oil on the water. The lead Japanese ship continued north, firing sporadically without coordination. American shells chased her for 4 miles before radar showed her dead in the water. She burned dimly from repeated hits, her fire weakening. Merrill ordered Waller to close and finish her, but before the destroyer could reach torpedo range, the enemy ship rolled over and sank on its own. 10 minutes of combat sent 2 Japanese destroyers to the bottom of Kula Gulf. There was not a single American casualty. But the enemy knew they were here now. The bombardment of Villa Stanmore would proceed, but against an alerted defense. And somewhere in the darkness, more Japanese ships were racing south. The final blow. By May 1943, the bombardments had also become a painful routine. Munda and Villa Stanmore absorbed thousands of shells, burned through the night, and operated again by morning. Japanese engineers had turned repair into a muscle memory reaction. American commanders realized the truth. Only ground troops could solve this. But until those troops were ready, the Navy would keep hitting, every day if necessary. Admiral Ainsworth assembled the largest force yet, 15 ships. 4 cruisers would savage Villa Stanmore. 1 cruiser and 2 destroyers would pound Munda. 3 converted destroyers would mine Kula Gulf's approaches. If they couldn't destroy the airfields, maybe they could sink the supply ships feeding them. The approach was ideal. Clear weather, no enemy contact. At 1 a.m. on May 13th, every American gun opened fire simultaneously. 10,000 shells in 1 hour. Munda was ablaze. 2 minutes into the bombardment, disaster struck Nashville. Turret 3 erupted in a ball of fire. 2 powder charges had ignited prematurely, the cause unknown. Nashville kept firing with her remaining guns. While shells rained down, the mine layers slipped along Kolombangara's coast. They sowed 252 mines in 3 perfect rows, 8,400 yards of explosives waiting beneath the surface. Within 48 hours, coast watchers would report 3 Japanese destroyers hitting mines and sinking. Dawn brought retribution. Japanese search planes found Task Force Affirm racing south. At 1 p.m., Henderson Field radar detected incoming aircraft. Controllers scrambled 102 fighters, the largest defensive effort in South Pacific history. 26 Zeros dove through the screen. In minutes, 17 Japanese planes were falling in flames. American losses: 5 planes, 3 pilots. The Japanese had thrown their best punch and failed. Sinkpack's assessment was brutally honest. Quote, "A large-scale bombardment for only harassing purposes, with expenditure of nearly 10,000 rounds of ammunition, is not believed justified by the results obtained." The assessment was right. Within hours, both airfields were operational again. On July 2nd, American soldiers and Marines landed in New Georgia. For 5 weeks, they fought for jungle, disease, and fanatical resistance. By August 5, 1943, soldiers of the 14th Corps overran Munda's defenders. The airfield that couldn't be destroyed from the air or sea finally fell to men on the ground. Within 2 weeks, American planes operated from the runway that had cost so much blood. The 6-month battle was over. Finally, the island road to Rabaul lay open.